Hello, all you true crime fans. I've officially reached over 400 subscribers. I'm trying my hardest to reach 1,000, so if you enjoy this video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I look forward to seeing you in the future on my journey to reach my goal. Thank you, and enjoy the video. My last video covered Kohberger's movements to the 1122 King Road home, as well as the possible events that occurred in the house during the crimes. This video will take us through his movements after he left the crime scene and cover areas I believe he could have disposed of evidence. Affidavit of probable cause, brief description of information. The vehicle consistent with a white Elantra is seen departing the King Road area at approximately 4:20 a.m. at a high rate of speed, which isn't suspicious at all. It is next observed traveling southbound on Willanta Drive. Officers believe the vehicle exited the neighborhood at Pelosa River Drive and Concetigo Drive, which is at the southern edge of Moscow. This road proceeds into Whitman County, Washington. This road also eventually leads to Pullman, Washington. Pullman, Washington is approximately 10 miles from Moscow, Idaho. It's important to note at this time that officers believe that the vehicle exited the neighborhood at Concetoga Drive and Pelosa River Drive. The whereabouts of the vehicle or Bryan Kohberger's phone are unverified in the affidavit of probable cause until Kohberger turns his phone back on. Based on the lack of known location of Kohberger's phone or vehicle at this time and the missing evidence in this case, I have come up with two possible scenarios of movements. Bryan Kohberger's phone is turned back on around 4:48 a.m. and begins to use cellular resources that provide coverage to Idaho State Highway 95 south of Moscow, Idaho, near Blaine, Idaho, which is north of Guinness, Idaho. And guess what? Blaine, Idaho is a vast, sprawling area of nothing that you would be driving around at 4:48 in the morning. If Kohberger left the scene of the crime closer to 4:25 a.m., like investigators believe, and didn't turn his phone back on until 4:48 a.m., this would allow a window of 23 minutes where his approximate whereabouts would not be known, except for on recording in the neighboring areas of the King Road home. Since investigators have yet to find the knife used in the crime and no clothing items of interest were taken from Kohberger's apartment or vehicle, and Kohberger has shown signs of extensive criminal knowledge, I believe it's possible Kohberger discarded these items at this time. Since the knife can't be burned, I would assume that it was buried, thrown into a body of water, or discarded in some similar way. Blaine, Idaho appears to me to be an area full of farm and fields, an area that you would probably not be at 4:48 in the morning, 23 minutes after a crime was committed, literally 9 miles away. A crime where your sheath with your DNA was left. One of the routes Kohberger could have used to get to this area in the time frame before he turned his phone back on comes to a 4-way intersection. In our first movement of scenario, Kohberger would have entered this area traveling eastbound at this intersection. He would have either traveled straight or right if he wanted to go into areas filled with vast amounts of farming land. He could have also drove north at this time towards a forested area. Reaching the four-way stop in the Blaine, Idaho area generally takes 16 minutes from the path Kohberger allegedly took when he left the crime scene. However, it was determined that he was driving at a fast rate of speed in the neighborhood areas where his vehicle was spotted leaving the crime scene on camera. Which leads me to believe that it is possible that in this unknown time frame of his whereabouts, he could have reached this area on the screen now, which is the area I believe he could have likely discarded the items pertaining to the crime in this scenario of movements. It's an almost perfect location. If this image in the area circled on the screen now depicts a drivable road, it would provide cover for Kohberger and his vehicle. It would also give Kohberger a secluded area to discard incriminating items. If Kohberger took this possible route, it would have taken him 16 minutes to get to Blaine, Idaho, whereabout he turned his phone back on and traveled towards Guinness, Idaho. If Kohberger left the residential area he was traveling through and continued east on Palouse River Drive to get to the Blaine, Idaho area instead of taking Highway 95, his path of travel would have led him into a forested area in 13 minutes. This route would have taken him to Blaine, Idaho in 20 minutes, which would leave his time frame whereabouts with only 3 minutes unaccounted for. Factors like high rate of travel, possible pre-planned dumping site, and approximate time estimations should be allowed to extend this missing frame of time and allow for this area to be considered a possible dumping site for the missing evidence. It's possible that these areas are so vast and little traveled that Kohberger could have dug a hole in this area prior to the crime. If he dug a hole or chose a dumping site location before the crime took place, this would allow him to reduce the time he was out in this area. Kohberger could have either used this route to cover his tracks by leaving in a direction that wasn't consistent with traveling to Pullman, Washington, and or as a location to dump evidence. Since the window of time frame is so narrow, it is likely that evidence was disposed of somewhere else. Although given known information about Kohberger, his acts taken to cover his tracks, his apparent knowledge of criminal activity and apprehension, I would not rule out this area and similar areas as a possible evidence dumping ground location. Affidavit of probable cause, brief description of information. On the afternoon of November 13th, 2022, Kohberger leaves his apartment in Pullman, Washington, and travels to Lewistown, Idaho. At approximately 12:36 p.m., Kohberger's vehicle is seen on surveillance footage provided by the U.S. Chef's store in Clarkston, Washington. At 12:49 p.m., Kohberger is on surveillance going into an Albertson grocery store at 400 Bridge Street in Clarkston, Washington. He buys unknown items and leaves the store at 1:04 p.m. Phone records show that between 5:32 p.m. and 5:36 p.m., the phone was in an area that provided coverage to Johnson, Idaho. The phone stops reporting to the network from 5:36 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Wouldn't it be kind of funny if investigators looked into his phone and found out that his phone is like never off except for around this time frame, and then he turns it back on 16 minutes away from an area where a murder was just committed, like literally 23 minutes prior? Like, why is he even trying at this point? If officers don't have a list of the items Kohberger bought, that would mean that there wasn't a credit card transaction associated with Kohberger's name, which means he either used cash or the store does not keep records for item purchases. I assume because of all the change that's in his vehicle when they searched it, he probably does pay for stuff with cash and just thinks he's so smart about it. Just like the way that he turns his cell phone off. It's this guy's ridiculous. I believe it's most likely if investigators could get these items listed, they would have added them into the affidavit. Next, I want to point out the area of Johnson, Idaho. This is a vast, sprawling area of forestry. Although I don't believe this was the area Kohberger was in following the crime he allegedly committed on November 13th, 2022, this is a very similar area to the forested area I believe he had traveled to or through before his phone was turned back on at 4:48 a.m. after he left the crime scene. He spent about 3 hours after turning his phone off in the Johnson, Idaho area. Unfortunately, it is not mentioned what location the phone was in when it was turned back on. It's possible that he used this area as a dumping ground for either all evidence from the murders he committed hours prior, or for some of the evidence, possibly items he realized he still had. However, it is more likely that he disposed of the clothes he was wearing during the commission of the crime at this location because clothing items are able to be burned, and burning clothes takes a significantly longer amount of time than the time allowed to dispose of evidence in Kohberger's unknown whereabouts in the night prior. Because of his seemingly extensive knowledge pertaining to crime and his obvious care to attempt to cover up his actions, I would assume that Kohberger would burn the clothing evidence because he would most likely be wary of DNA evidence. If Kohberger has done something like this before, it's possible that he utilized forested areas or hiking areas to dump evidence. It's possible that prior to the events that took place at the King Road home, he searched out and visited forested areas. It's also possible that he picked his victims at the King Road home location because of the victim type and their home's close proximity to more rural areas. Affidavit of probable cause, brief description of information. Kohberger's phone was found to have been in the area that provided coverage to 1122 King Road home on at least 12 occasions prior to November 13th, 2022. He moved there in August to go to school. And before November, he was in that area on 12 occasions. If you can't tell, I really truly believe that Bryan Kohberger is guilty of these crimes. What are the chances that his phone is in all these locations and he's just a creeper and his DNA is on the sheath and he didn't do it? Did you guys notice that in the evidence log of items taken from his parents' house, he had ID cards that were in a glove inside of a box? I don't know what that means, but that is so disturbing to me. I'm so glad he's been arrested, and I believe that he's going to be 100% convicted of this, and he's going to get the death penalty because the crimes that he committed are just so disturbing and pre-planned and just absolutely heinous. Please like, comment, and subscribe as it helps my channel grow, lets me know I'm doing a good job, and best of all, it's free.